Let's remember that what set this off is one 22-year-old kid who was radicalized online, as so often. Let's not give him too much power to determine the nature of reality in the United States in 2025. It wasn't really hard. You could still support Palestinian rights or whatever, or be critical of Israel without endorsing Hamas or writing off October 7th as either overblown or it didn't happen. What's wrong with the left?
Is the England lion roaring?
It's regular people who were born in the UK and love their country and love their neighbors, see their country being drastically transformed in a way that nobody asked them about, and have had enough.
Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Lionel Shriver. Lionel, welcome to the show.
Always enjoy talking to you.
Should say welcome back. You've been on a few times now. I think you're one of our most regular returning guests. And I was thinking...
I'm a fan. I'm
well,
pathetic, actually. I just sit around waiting for your invitation.
Even better. I was thinking the other day, I want to talk to someone to work out what the hell is going on in America. And of course, you flew into my mind as someone who could provide, some sunlight on a confusing situation. And of course, I want to ask you about the killing of Charlie Kirk, the fallout from the killing of Charlie Kirk, and what might come next. So I guess I'll just kick off by asking you what you thought when this happened, when you saw this. My view is in essence that it was incredibly shocking, but not necessarily surprising. And I wonder what your view was when you saw this event.
Well, I guess these things are always surprising in their way. If I'm going to be totally honest, my immediate reaction was, who's Charlie Kirk? And by the way, that's the way a lot of people reacted and won't admit it. But honestly, he wasn't on my radar. He's politically not of the group of people whom I would follow. He's much more Christian than I am. He is one or was one. And not a big believer in the separation of church and state. I think wanted the U.S. to be to return to being deliberately Christian. That's not a view I especially share. I guess now that I know something of what he espoused, because we shared a suspicion of the transgender movement, and he had conservative leanings, I think, economically. So do I. Obviously, I'd be in the camp that finds assassination as a way to express your opinion, kind of uncool. But in my Spectator column this week, I have argued that maybe in relation to the assassination itself, that we may be in danger of overinterpreting it. And in fact, in insisting on seeing it as some big political watershed, I feared that we increased the likelihood of copycat incidents, especially right now on the left. There's this weird competition going on right now in the media of whether the left or the right is worse, with who's more violent, especially in relation to political violence, who's worse. It's a rather fruitless exercise. I gather that if you just go by sheer fatalities, just body count, I think the right has racked up more. I suspect that one of the ways that this body count is rigged is by going back to Oklahoma City, which I don't remember exactly the fatalities in that incident. It was a bombing of a federal building, anti-IRS. It was in the hundreds. It was something like 240-something people. So if you throw those people in, then the right is way ahead from the beginning. But I find the contest a little pointless, and it may be boring, but I appreciate the politicians who simply renounce political violence regardless of your purpose. So, I don't think we need to regard this as a point at which all hell is breaking loose. And let's remember that what set this off is one 22-year-old kid who was radicalized online, as so often. He seems a little off, as so often. And let's not give him too much power to determine the nature of reality in the United States in 2025. I do think that the aftermath of the shooting and the reaction to it has been informative, especially on the far left and among a lot of young people online. It's been disheartening. It's the same. They're the same people who've supported October 7th. I'm hoping that it's cheap support for violence. Like, it's all very well, to find it edgy and ghoulishly stimulating, but maybe it doesn't translate into doing anything. I'm sure in most instances it does. So I don't know how seriously we should take it. But on the other hand, I am discouraged by the Trump administration's reaction to it. I don't mind them being upset about it, but the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, has now announced publicly that hate speech is not covered by the First Amendment. This is like the main person in charge of law enforcement in the federal government, and she doesn't know that the Supreme Court has very specifically ruled that hate speech, which is, after all, a very soft category, it's in the eye of the beholder, as we've discovered in the UK, that it is covered by the First Amendment most decidedly. And it's one of the things that sets the US and the UK apart on the free speech business, and especially when Trump is in the UK right now, and the UK itself has this free speech crisis, which is mostly about hate speech. That's a big gaffe.
I think that's such a good outline of where we're at, because I was thinking similarly, which is that there is a tendency to overinterpret acts like this, and it does sometimes imbue the alleged killer or the killer with too much power. And it's often the impact that the act has which tells us more about society than the act itself, because there's always going to be sickos who do stupid or evil things, but it's how society responds that is often more revealing. And I wanted to ask you about that, I guess, from two different perspectives. The first is the celebrations of it. Now, you say let's not make too much of it, and I agree, because you can over egg that pudding as well. But one of the things that has struck me from the US is there is a relatively significant number of people in everyday life who seem to have been celebrating it. So we're talking about nurses and some academics and a couple of teachers. It's not millions of people, but there are certain people. Do you think that tells us anything? Of course, then there's the overreaction to it from the Trump administration, which suddenly thinks we need new laws or new crackdowns on expression. What do you think that response might tell us about America, if anything?
Well, on the left, there is a hardening and a barbarism that has reared its ugly head before. I mean, the left-wing response to the Luis Mangione assassination of the United Health CEO, which was, it was equally gross. It was cold. It was uncalled for. Also a family man, didn't achieve anything, right? Same. So totally misguided, undeserved. And he became, and still is, as far as I know, some kind of left-wing icon standing up against the meanie health insurance companies, and they like him because he's handsome. He's not my type, actually, but I'm told many people find him handsome. I don't like this development. Uh, I think there is a flirtation with political violence on the left that isn't necessarily all talk. So I wouldn't take it too seriously, but I wouldn't ignore it. And I do think that the fringes of the left are becoming morally unhinged. Okay? And I especially noticed that in response to October 7th, because that was the most animalistic, grotesque exercise of violence in my memory, and I'm old. So I remember a lot of things, and I've never encountered anything during my lifetime that was that stomach churning, and that deliberately so. I mean, going out to be as morally loathsome as possible. And, it wasn't really hard. You could still support Palestinian rights or whatever, or be critical of Israel without endorsing Hamas or writing off October 7th as either overblown or it didn't happen. I mean, what's wrong with the left? And also, this is part of it's part of their Manichaean thinking, and with us and against us, and also part of this disgusting groupthink where, it's the hive mind, and it moves on to this obsession with whatever. Now that I guess we're through with climate change, I'm kind of wanting to see the back of it, but I'm not sure this anti-Israel, anti-Semitic hate fest is an improvement on economic suicide.
Yeah, I absolutely. It might even be a downward step from that previous lunacy. Yeah, I think the response to 7th of October kind of set the tone for, I guess, the turn towards barbarism. I think you used the word barbarism there, and that's a very apt word, not only for the act carried out by Hamas, but also the sympathy for it and the support for it in the West represents, I think, a rejection of civilizational values and an embrace of barbaric values. Um, in relation to but in terms of what the response to Charlie Kirk tells us, we had this reaction from part of the unhinged fringes of the left, as you say, and from other sections of the left too, I think. But then we have this pushback that you've already referenced from the Trump administration saying this is hate speech, this is outrageous. There was also the spectacle of JD Vance encouraging people to phone employers, encouraging people, if you see someone make these kinds of comments, phone their employers, make sure they lose their jobs. There's been a lot of that. What have you made of that? Do you think there's an argument to be made that if you bring your employer into disrepute, you might get into hot water? Or do you think this is symptomatic of the fact that the Trump administration might not be as friendly towards free speech as they have previously claimed?
I don't think Trump himself is a very principled person. I don't think he's motivated by immovable conviction. And I don't want to make, boring summaries of his character, commonplace, obviously very self-centered, about his own glorification. But this is an instance where his lack of principle, and therefore a kind of contagious lack of principle, uh, is showing that it has real consequences. Um, his own administration doesn't understand that if you support free speech, then you support the right of people to say very unpleasant things, including about you, and even about the murder of someone on your side. And y- y- the whole concept of hate speech is a left-wing concept, and it is poisonous. It has proved poisonous in the UK. Any number of opinions can be classified as hate speech. I mean, we're dealing with this with the Islamophobia issue. Oh, if you bring that in, is it going to be possible to criticize the actual religion and its beliefs and the way that people in that religion treat women, for example. Can you not say that anymore? So it's a place the United States does not want to go. A reputable conservative and Republican has no business using that expression aside from to decry it and to say that we don't use that category in this country. It is not a useful category, and it is certainly not a conservative category.
Whenever I hear the words hate speech, to me, I just think of thought crime. I just instantly think that it's as preposterous a phrase as, policing thoughts or policing emotion. The state has no place policing words or emotions. That should be the bottom line of all sensible thought, I think.
Also, I've grown to hate the word hate,
Yeah.
right? I'm sick of it being thrown around. It's part of this whole vocabulary of hyperbole that has depreciated language, and it's just name calling. It's not
Yeah.
real argument.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In relation to Charlie Kirk, people are commenting on not only the horror of what happened, but also the symbolism of it. So I read an interesting piece this week talking about how, one of the reasons his death and the images of his death impacted on the world is because he died with a microphone in his hand. Not a gun, not a knife, not anything threatening, but a microphone that he was using to express views. And in fact, in the very second he was killed, he was expressing views about transgenderism. He was saying that there has been a rise in transgender violence, and one of the students in the audience was pushing back against him. So it's very symbolic, I think, of a crisis that you and many others have talked about for some time, which is the issue of cancel culture, the issue of people being punished for their beliefs. Usually the punishment is not quite as extreme. It's usually being blacklisted or disinvited or thrown out of the dinner party circle. Do you think it's appropriate to see this within the scope of cancel culture, or do you think that's giving too much credence to the assassin? And I guess a follow-on question from that is what impact you think it might have on campus culture in America. Will it lead to more of a clampdown, more nervousness, an unwillingness of supposedly controversial figures to speak in public? What do you think the fallout will be for campus culture, which already wasn't in a very good state?
I think for the time being, at least, you're going to see a lot more conservative commentators decline invitations to universities or decline invitations to certainly open air events, and be reluctant to do events which don't put the audience through metal detectors. I mean, it's a depressing way to have to organize your civic life, but I would understand a sense of caution, especially for right of center speakers. And I would hope that wouldn't last and wouldn't be reinforced by more similar incidents. But I get a little anxious on my own account, especially since I've stuck my neck out pretty far on the transgender issue. As a phenomenon, I find it decadent, and very damaging. But and it's not that this group of activists, they're almost all male to female, men in dresses. They're not representative of everyone who's wished they were the other sex. I mean, but they are pretty weird and potentially very violent. I mean, they're men. They definitely still have some testosterone left, and I find them a little scary. And I know that the other, especially women who have been outspoken on this issue, are likewise nervous about these people, and have had to contend with that nervousness for a long time, and for the most part have successfully battled it and still made public appearances, still published books, still pushed back, still organized, put together organizations and brought that huge and consequential UK Supreme Court ruling. And that was, you know, people, the ordinary people who are pushing back. And, so far, nobody's murdered any of them that I know of, but they know they operate in a risky environment. And maybe that sensation of having to be genuinely a little bit brave, we that's another word we throw around a lot. I get called brave when I'm just running my mouth. And I can't help it. So, I see a wariness. I know one person in particular that has a lot of profile, and I'm not going to cite him by name, but is now taking serious security measures around his home. So I'm afraid that is one of the results of this event.
Yeah, it seems, pretty inevitable. As you say, hopefully short term rather than long term. Hopefully it doesn't last. Where do you think the free speech wars stand? It's always been difficult to decipher the free speech wars because sometimes the left claims to be pro freedom of speech. For example, they will stand up for the right of people to march against Israel or to say, I hate Israel, or whatever else they want to say. Sometimes the right posers have been in favor of free speech. JD Vance in particular, I quite liked the speech he gave in Europe a few months ago when he said, listen, you guys have abandoned the principles of freedom, the pillars of civilization, and he particularly picked out Britain, and he was absolutely right about that. But now you have a situation where the left is more than happy to cancel people for wrongthink, especially on issues like trans. The right has responded to the killing of Charlie Kirk by behaving in a pretty censorious way too. Some people refer to it as the woke right. Where does free speech go from here? Are either side capable of defending it in a meaningful way?
Well, you have to return to the principle itself, which is not right or left. And that's something that everyone has to remember. This is a right that is precious to everyone, and it is not a partisan issue, or it shouldn't be. And when it's being used in a purely partisan way, it's being warped. One of the problems in the UK is that since there is no written constitution, and there is no First Amendment, there's all this legislation which infringes on free speech, but there's no legislation that defends it. Where is the law that says you have a right to express your opinion? Nowhere. And the only laws that get passed, like the Human Rights Act, they're all about shutting you up. They're not about your rights. They're about other people's rights to shut you up. And I really think, if reform gets into power, I'm not going to hold my breath for Labor coming up with any such legislation. No, Labor does not believe in free speech. That's demonstrably true. But if reform were to get into power, I would argue that's one of the biggest things they have to do. Stick up for the majority of people who just want to be able to say what they think, even if it's not nice. Whereas, that's what the hate speech thing is all about. It's the legislation of niceness.
Absolutely. Enforced niceness. You can think of nothing worse. Yeah, it's so true about human rights legislation because it always has this line, everyone has the right to freedom of speech. And then it
But
says, except in the following situation, and it
right,
lists all the ways in which you can be legitimately censored. So basically, you don't have the right to freedom of speech. That's what human rights law says. In relation to Britain, a country you know well, you lived here for a long time. As you say, Trump is here currently. You said earlier that the Trump administration's response to Charlie Kirk has been a gaffe. I think that's right. And what do you think it means for Trump's visit to Britain? Do you think it will neuter any plan he might have been making to have a pop at Starmer, or to talk about our free speech problem, or to build on some of the concerns that have been growing in this country about two-tier justice, the suppression of freedom of speech? These are things Trump might have been expected to mention, at least in passing, when there's a microphone in front of him. Do you think he's just unable to do that now because his administration has made a fluff of its defense of supposed principles in the wake of the events of the past few days.
Well, what little influence he has, he's blowing, because if he comes down hard on Starmer about free speech, he's obviously made himself into a hypocrite. I don't think he does have a lot of influence on Starmer. This is a domestic issue for the UK. It is not a US issue. We can all, I'm in New York right now, so I can have my opinion about the UK. And I will say that I talk to people who've never really expressed any real interest in Britain, honestly. Maybe they've been there once, but, it's just all about the Queen or something. And then they're suddenly coming to me and say, what's going on in the UK? What's with the free speech thing? I mean, what's wrong with them? They're actually disturbed. And I figured out why. It is the Graham Linehan story, which penetrated American indifference to everything British, okay? It was the airport. It was being arrested right off the plane in the airport. Now, he's not even a British citizen, and he put that stuff online that he was arrested over. I hate tweets. I can't even say it. In the United States, right? And yet, he was arrested right off the plane. Now, Americans of a certain stripe who travel, and that's a lot of people, suddenly think that could be me. And it's when people start taking things personally that they pay attention. And that's why the Linehan story penetrated the American upper middle class mind. It's like, oh, I don't like that picture. 5 armed police detained for, I don't know, what was it, 8 or 12 hours? My holiday ruined.
Yeah.
That was it. I haven't read that interpretation anywhere else, but it came to me as a revelation from the sky.
It's we've got Graham coming up on the pod soon, talking about his tyrannical experience with the Heathrow police, armed police, absolutely insane. Over those 3 tweets, the most controversial of which is when he advises women who can't get a bloke out of their bathroom to punch him in the balls. The idea that that's incitement to violence is just ridiculous and stupid. But did that? And he talks to me about how his case made an impact on, even in Washington, there are people there now saying, look, why are people being arrested at airports in the UK for funny tweets? So do you think it made an impact in the political sphere in America? So I'm sure you're right, absolutely, that some people are thinking, oh, damn, what if I get arrested on my, stopover in London on my way to Paris or whatever? But did it make an impact politically amongst, I guess, old stripe liberals or in the Trump administration? Do you get a sense that there is shock at that level that Britain is really going down the Swanee, as demonstrated by what happened to Graham?
I mean, yeah, I think it's made an impact. The Linehan story was the route to many an article reviewing all the other stories, and there are lots of stories. In fact, there are many more stories than we know about. I mean, if I recall correctly, isn't it like the 30 arrests a day because of what people say online? And that's absolutely appalling. And in spite of the fact that the police have been discouraged from issuing these things, they're still handing out those non-crime hate incident citations like Halloween candy. And I mean, honestly, Americans can't take that category seriously. They think it's a joke. It's so far-fetched. And it is funny if it weren't real. So yeah, I mean, it has made an impact. Not just, I suspect, on Trumpsters, but on classical liberals who still care about these things.
Yeah, when I've tried to explain non-crime hate incidents to Americans, they just don't know what they're like, what? You didn't commit a crime, but you still get recorded by the police? It's such a mysterious category for the American mind. It would be remiss of me, Lionel, not to ask you just a couple of questions about the UK and where things are at here. You've mentioned reform already and the possibility that they might sweep into power. Let's see. Um, what do you think about the Starmer government right now? I'm alarmed. I have growing alarm every day. I'm sure you do too. What's your take on what they're up to at the moment?
Well, it's obviously a disaster. Um, Even the people in the Labor Party think so. The smash the gangs has hasn't worked out very well. Um, I'm starting to think, these smuggling gangs should put together a financial product because I want to invest.
Yeah.
It's definitely a growth model. And his one in, one out is
Yeah.
turning out to be a farce because people like Starmer, other human rights lawyers, are managing to stop even the tiny number of people that they were going to send back to France, only to replace them. I mean, it's so illogical, and it's so pointless, and it's so not going to placate all the opposition to the asylum hotels, for example. You really wonder why he's bothering. But he is profoundly ineffectual, and as a persona, he's just unimpressive, and he's one of those kind of little ordinary people that is completely incapable of generating the kind of mystique that you want to have just a little bit around any national leader. Ain't no mystique, just mistake. My biggest concern is widely shared, which is economic. And I just think that the UK is in big trouble, and it's getting there fast. And the trouble with economic crises is that they don't necessarily send a memo like this is going to happen in 6 months. They happen very suddenly, without warning, and I don't think there is any appreciation on a popular level for how profoundly that could affect ordinary people. Affect the value of the pound, therefore the value of imports. Your interest rates are likely to start soaring. At some point, the government has to cut back on its expenses, and therefore all the services that you count on are even more inadequate than ever. Picturing a UK PLC as more dysfunctional than it is right now is kind of boggles the mind, but I think it probably is possible. I don't think that raising taxes is going to work. We're on the wrong side of the Laffer curve. So people are, with any assets are going to keep leaving. I'm worried. I'm actively worried about British finances because some of my best friends are British, and I care about what happens to the country. And the U.S. has the same problem, I hasten to add. I think it's probably got a little more time before things blow up. And also, when things start blowing up, economically, we're so integrated now. It's a global financial system, and therefore you can get a domino effect. So, but it's looking as if we can mix up our metaphors into a real mess. The UK could be the canary in the coal mine, right? It could be one of the first in line. And I'm not going to get a lot of gratification out of "I told you so."
It's interesting that the economic question very often plays second fiddle to the cultural questions. And on one level, you understand it. Cultural questions a sense of cultural security or cultural concerns can often feel more pressing to people, especially as you say, because there's no memo, there's no letter saying, listen, this is coming around the corner and it could explode at any minute in terms of the economic mess. I did just want to ask you, however, one more question about the border situation in Britain. And because this is something I think about all the time, I don't have an easy answer to it, but why is the government, and not just this government, but the previous government, why are they unable to get a handle on Britain's borders? Firstly, they can't stop the 750 men or whatever it is that turn up on our borders almost every single day. But also, even more pointedly, when those men are in the country, they are incapable of kicking them out or saying, well, actually, you came here illegally, so you need to go. What explains that incapacity, that basic state incapacity to preserve the borders of the state? What's going on there?
You know what they are. And it's a problem. It was a problem not just for this government. It's been going on for a long time. It's a set of antiquated principles that derive from after World War II. Both the left and the center right are attached to them, and they want to seem like nice people. They there is no taking seriously that this is a crisis, and it is, it's destroying the country, and it's one of the many feeders of economic dysfunction. From the immigrant standpoint, you can certainly understand wanting to come to the UK. I mean, a free hotel room, stipend, phone. If you've got family, they'll put you together with whoever got there earlier. Why not? If you're from an impoverished place and you have no resources, this is a great deal. Who could resist it? I mean, it's insane. New York has a lot of the same problem. During the migration crisis in Biden's administration, they kept up their idiotic right to shelter. So basically promising anyone who comes here that the government has to put them up. So the government literally owes you a living. And so, big surprise, a huge number of migrants, over 200,000, took them up on the offer. I mean, you have to realize when you construct incentives like that, rational people are going to respond to them. So you change the incentives. You don't put migrants in hotels. Ideally, you put them somewhere off the mainland, and ideally you send them back. So, I mean, right, you have to get rid of all that legislation. You have to get rid of any treaty that means you can't control who's in your country. It's primitive. And I just think that the so-called elite do not take it seriously. And they don't take it seriously because the migrants don't live in their neighborhoods.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, Lionel, my last question for you is just on what might happen next in Britain and whether there might be a chink of light coming, leaving aside economic questions for now. But you mentioned the possibility of reform moving up, and it remains to be seen whether they'd be good at government or even whether they will get into government. There was also the huge demonstration at the weekend. People call it a far-right march, but in fact, it was primarily ordinary working-class Brits saying, look, the country's out of control, we need to sort it out. And of course, there were far-right elements there too. Does that stuff give you hope? Do you think, some people are saying the English lion is roaring? We've seen flags going up everywhere, which is not particularly English's behavior. It's more familiar in places like Northern Ireland, the England flag and the Union flag on the Shankill Road and the Irish flag on the Falls Road, an area, a part of the world well as well. Is the England lion roaring, or is that being overdone?
I mean, socially and culturally, I think it's encouraging. I mean, we have heard disproportionately, especially during the last 10 years, from the shrill far left, and demonstrations of any size have, been all about George Floyd's murder or something. It's mostly been from the left, and of course all those demonstrations against Israel. It's nice to see the other side, and it's not really a side. It's mainstream Britain. It's regular people who were born in the UK and love their country and love their neighbors and see their country being drastically transformed in a way that nobody asked them about, and have had enough, and also don't want to see their taxes going to strangers who've made no contribution and are basically just usurping resources that don't belong to them. It's a kind of theft, and I think that's the way ordinary people see it. Why do we owe these people anything? For the most part, they are not fleeing persecution. They just want, quote, a better life, which is the title of my upcoming novel. Get in the plug. And it's not fair. And we rack our brains over what it means to be British and what are British values. Well, I think that's probably the leading value for Britons is fairness. And the idea of fairness has been hijacked by the left, and it's been turned into so-called social justice. And social justice is all about rewarding minorities, not about rewarding majorities. And this is these demonstrations that culminated in the that big one whose population, I've read all different estimates of the crowd. I find it very encouraging that regular people are not intimidated anymore, not terrified of being called far right, and not terrified of being called racist, and are willing to show what they think. Now, will it have any consequence? All right. I mean, did that huge protest against the Iraq War have any effect on what Tony Blair did in the Middle East? I don't think so.
Lionel, thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.